Hey guys, thank you so much for watching and listening to another episode of the Woodsong podcast. I'm your host, Sam Larson, and today we have a really special interview that I'm very excited about. It's with Tim Smith, who's a master Maine guide and a bushcraft educator. He's the founder of the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School based out of Masardis, Maine, and he's been a close friend and mentor to me for about the past 6 or 7 years. And I wanted to bring him on to the podcast to speak about bushcraft education, particularly higher education, which he's very involved in. I believe he's run more immersion programs than anyone else in the world, and definitely in the United States. On top of teaching bushcraft at a school, Tim is also responsible for being an incredible consultant for many TV shows based on the survival genre, everywhere from way back at Man vs. Wild to Naked and Afraid. He's done a great job with that, been very successful, and I think there's no one better to have on here to discuss the topic of higher education in the field of bushcraft. A lot of folks have wondered, what they have to do to become a bushcraft educator or an instructor, and if you turn that into the Google machine, it'll come up with a bunch of probably really bad articles and pieces of information, YouTube videos for you to look at. So rather than just doing that, I decided to take the source here and do a podcast interview with him. So sit back and relax. It's about an hour right on the dot, and we're happy that you guys clicked the play button.
All right, so I'm ready to roll whenever you are.
Man, you have Kleenexes there. That's fancy. All I have is a drink.
A roll of toilet paper. Well, I've got a 64-ounce guide canteen full of whiskey.
Oh. Too bad I can't call it a water bottle, because it doesn't have water in it.
It's the guide canteen. It's
yeah, the guide canteen.
It's only the guide's business. This is a stretch of my technological understanding and capabilities to pull this off. So, for those of you out there in podcast or video land, treat us gently with a grain of salt, right? I am not a technological expert, so.
Yeah,
anyway.
I'm not either. I'm happy things are getting easy now. It's not.
Yeah.
5-10 years ago you had to actually know about stuff to do stuff. Now these companies just make it super easy for you, and you're like, oh yeah, I can do that. But,
it was so incredibly complicated. I remember, I'm going to date myself, but I remember before YouTube, a friend and I shot a silly little video, and we were trying to put it on the internet, and it was the hardest thing ever. So
yeah, yep.
It's much better now that you just plug things in and hit start, and it starts.
Right,
so
right, definitely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. It used to be difficult back in the day. I'm the worst millennial ever, too. So I'm the same. I don't know how things work. I don't have a Snapchat or anything like that. I'd rather not make myself look like a puppy. I think advances in the poop emoji are exactly what they may seem to be. It's not something that really concerns me a bunch.
Yeah. So just to get everybody up to speed, Sam here came out to the field school in northern Maine. I don't remember what year it was. It was a while ago. You were a young guy who had just graduated from high school.
Yep.
And I've got some old photos. Maybe I'll trickle out to prove that. But had a great experience with us, or at least I think it was good enough for you to come back the following summer. Had spent some great time with our mutual friend Tom Moore, a.k.a. Whiskey Jack, a.k.a. the Tomahawk. And we could probably go on with about 50 more a.k.a.s. But in the mountains of Arizona, and has since embarked on your own career of teaching, instructing. You've done some television work, so where are you at now? You're still in Lincoln, Nebraska, correct?
Yeah, I'm still in Nebraska. I leave the state a lot for instructing and teaching sometimes. Most of the instructing I do in the state is for really young kids, elementary age. So I do quite a bit of that, depending on the season. And a writer, I published a book back in December, and then beyond that, I'm an accidental showbiz person. Never actually wanted to necessarily be on TV, but the opportunity came up and it sounded like fun, and so I did it. And but yeah, that's where we're at now. I'm doing a lot of writing, freelance instructing, and looking at definitely some pretty great future plans for the rest of 2018. I think things will be going probably a lot different this time next year as far as the teaching scene. Got some things up my sleeve that I just can't reveal yet, but yeah, that's what I'm up to at the moment here. And
awesome.
The thing I find interesting is you talk about, like, I was there when I was 18, so I turned 25 this year, so 7 years. It doesn't seem like 7 years to me, at least.
Wow. Makes me feel old.
so Tim, over at the Jack Mountain Bushcraft campus, it's not like right off the main highway type deal. Like, you are in the boonies when you get there, and when you go on your canoe trips, you're even more in the boonies. Way more than just at your regular field school even. But one of the things for me, you're there on campus the whole time. It's not one of those like commute there 3 days a week type programs, and it's also you're living outside the whole time. When I was there, we didn't have the well dug yet. There was one structure on site, and we're bleaching our water every day, our drinking water, and so it was
not every day.
Not every. No, everyone hates the jerk who puts too much bleach in the water. You're like, man, but But you've done like some crazy things to the field school since I was there. Like you dug a well when I was there. What have you been doing at the school since then?
The biggest thing is the 15,000 square foot casino and ballroom that we put in last year. No, just kidding. We've, trickling in the infrastructure at the field school little by little, year after year. So, we finished off our one main office cabin. We built a 12 by 24 foot pavilion. We got a library cabin from the Amish up there where they will build it, throw it on a flatbed truck, and just come and drop it off. So there's no construction on site. Obviously a well. We've got a pond, and this year coming up, we're going to build a second teaching area in the whereabouts that we call Moose Vegas, which is our student camp. So we're going to clear a little bit of ground there and maybe put in a second well. We'll see. Good times in Moose Vegas.
Yeah. By the way, if you're not familiar, Moose Vegas is it's kind of around down the trail from your primary camp, and it's kind of like a little more swampy and tons of moose. And so as everything gets a fun nickname there, that's your Moose Vegas.
We've got a friend who's one of the editors for Down East magazine, and they did an episode a while back where they had a map of Maine with like 5 or 6 kind of colorful things thrown on there. So Moose Vegas was in a graphic in Down East magazine.
Nice. So, it made the cut.
Makes it legit. Awesome.
Well, it's to me, a lot of people might be thinking like, oh, you put another cabin on it, and your bushcraft camp? Come on, why can't you just rough it and all that? But the fact that it has a couple amenities at this point, I think is really beneficial to the students that come, because a lot of the work you want to get done there is pretty academic. Not in the boring kind of way, but in like it's nice to have a little warm place to study for a little while and to look through books and to store books where the mice won't chew them up and stuff like that. So I think it's awesome that you've been able to kind of make all these improvements to your school. And probably the biggest improvement, I guess we should probably talk about like actually what your big deal is, because you run week-long and occasionally like weekend little courses, but your bread and butter is the immersion courses. So tell us a little bit about like what are the long-term courses that you do at Jack Mountain?
Sure. Yep. So we run a 9-week semester course. We run it in the spring and the fall. Most years, I think in 19, we're only going to run a fall one, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, 9 weeks, people come, they camp and live on site in tents and shelters they build themselves. We go off into the forest on extended canoe trips, basically cooking every meal over a fire for 9 weeks and learning all the plants, the mammals, the natural history, the skills. And these are college accredited, so we have 2 articulations now, one with Western State Colorado University in Colorado, and we just got on board with the University of Maine system, specifically the University of Maine at Presque Isle, which is our local branch, and we're also covered by the GI Bill. So we have a lot of diversity in the students who come out, lots of returning veterans as well as college students, and then, other people who just want to go out and spend a couple of months living in the woods. So it's a neat mix.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great. So like, what are your, that's like some serious stuff. Not everyone is just like, oh yeah, I think I've got a spare 2 months in the fall that I can go hang out with, become a guide or, learn about how to guide people in the outdoors. What are the primary demographics of the students that you get?
That's really difficult. It changes year to year. I mean, I can look back and say who's come before demographically, but it's very difficult to sort of look forward and prognosticate on who's going to show up next year. So it's always interesting. I like to think that we have probably the most colorful characters that are walking around on planet Earth. A lot of them tend to spend a few months at our place, right? It is never, ever boring. And there are just a lot of just camp shenanigans and hilarities that go on, and it's sometimes it's pretty ridiculous, but we still manage to get quite a bit done. But yeah, we tend to skew. We're a little bit less than half military veteran at this point. Maybe 25, 30, maybe even 40% college students that are actually going for college credit. And then there's always 1 or 2 sort of older folks on a course who are just, looking for a change. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's important to know that like you've got all these different folks around, because the rumor was out for a short amount of time that it was kind of like a hippie hangout at the Jack Mountain School, which is really
hearing that.
really not true at all. A ton of veterans at this point with the GI Bill, which is awesome. It's great to see them all. I even had a buddy of mine who's a veteran here from Nebraska who did your fall program last year. So it's great to see the veteran folks heading out there and doing that and really making it a great time to have in the woods, learning a new career, and just being able to be more self-sufficient out in the natural world.
And especially for the veterans, we are not a therapy program, but it definitely is therapeutic to spend several months out, and there are some people coming back that have some issues and that have some challenges, and we like to think that for them spending 2 months in the woods without all the pressures of 2018, is just good for the heart, good for the soul, good for the head. And again, we're not a therapy program. That's not what we set out to do in the morning to get accomplished that day. But just being outside, kind of living by the rhythms of the sun and the moon and all that is very therapeutic.
Yeah, one of the things that you kind of learn when you've been in the outdoors for a while is that Mother Nature is like really the best instructor for you. So you don't have to be a great therapist if you structure your, if you structure your program correctly. Mother Nature takes care of that. You don't have to necessarily tell people like, hey, this is the best knife to use. If you put them in the situation where they have to answer to kind of like the natural world will teach them that rather than you having to tell them. Like
exactly
right. So you can just go out and see for yourself. Hey, is this the best knife for bushcraft? Well, why don't you spend some time in the woods, and then Mother Nature will tell you yourself.
Yeah, that's what people show up. We've had people show up with all kinds of goofy knives and goofy equipment over the years. And, something I learned very early on in this line of work was that never say anything bad about anybody's stuff, right? Because for some reason, it's like, when you walk into a car dealership, they sort of size you up and they figure we're going to show them this line of car because they think that it'll be like an extension of your personal ego. So you never trash talk somebody's knife, but people will say, hey, what do you think of this knife? I say, I don't know. Well, come back and ask me again in 2 weeks. And I guarantee we'll know if it's good or not.
Yeah. Like, hey, Amazon still deliver here, Tim? Because we're thinking of very, very good stuff. Yeah, it's always interesting. We even had one of my best gear memories of Jack Mountain was our mutual buddy Big Fish, who would walk around in his Crocs and wool socks around camp from time to time. He got pretty well known for that.
Oh yeah, sure.
So on the topic of like higher education stuff, you've done a lot of it, right? You've done how many semester programs at this point?
41 long-term immersion programs. So
41 long-term immersion programs. You'd be hard-pressed to find another program that's done 41 of these. And that's since 99, right?
Yeah, this is our 20th year, and I like to say that we're a 20-year overnight success.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to it, back then, late 90s, it's like most people didn't even know the word bushcraft in the late 90s.
I tell this story often, but when I started this business and I said, bushcraft, they're like, people assume that I was the guy that took the clippers and made the bushes look like Mickey Mouse at Disney World. Is that Topi area? It might be, but that's what they thought bushcraft was.
Yeah.
Anyway, and now the pendulum has swung all the way to the other direction where, the term bushcraft in many regards, in my opinion, has sort of jumped the shark in that, if you go onto some online forums, they're like, what are the best bushcraft pants or the best, it's just like most things when they become popular, they get completely co-opted by the marketers, and now it's all about, selling usually crappy pieces of gear. So
right.
That's where we're at now.
Exactly. One of the many lessons I learned at the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School is that if anyone tells you there's one way to do something, they're probably trying to sell you something.
That's so true. So true.
Did I come up with that, or did someone else?
I don't know.
Claiming it.
Might have been.
Claiming it.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. It's mine. Original.
Love
it's
it.
Not. That's awesome. So, I think we should also go back to how we met kind of for the first time, because I just shot you a random email basically, and was like, "Hey, I'm in high school." So I was a senior in high school, I believe, when I emailed you for the first time, and I said, what? How would this benefit me? What do you do on this course? So I'm going to kind of throw that back at you and say that you got an email from a person who's 17 or 18, so they're fresh and new, and they want to be a bushcraft instructor, just blanket. They want to teach bushcraft or survival skills in North America. What do you tell that person? What's the best way for them to go from a high school punk like me, like I was back then, to a qualified bushcraft instructor, full circle, through you and through anyone else you can think of, if you want to mention any other programs?
So we live in the era now. I'm going to say this, and then I'll do my sort of canned response to that hypothetical young person.
Oh yeah.
But we live in the era now where we are living with the myth of the overnight expert and the instant instructor, where everybody wants to go from knowing nothing to being a full-blown, celebrity, whatever, without putting in their dues. And it just takes a lot of time and expertise to be able to learn something and to get really good at it. So I use the example of how they register Maine guides now, but it could be maybe any trade, that you don't go to being a master Maine guide after you've had your guide license for a year and you've led 1 or 2 trips, right? At this point in time, it takes 10 years to become a master Maine guide if you've had your guide license for all 10 years. So, but let's put it in another industry. If you were an electrician, and if somebody could pay a little bit extra money and become a master electrician after 3 weeks, like, you want that guy wiring your house? Like, I don't. I'm happy that if I take my kid to the doctor, I'm usually pretty happy that they have to go to school for a long time and prove that they know what they're doing and really immerse themselves in it. Because if someone could take a weekend, I'm going to fix up your kid workshop, and then hang their shingle at the local hospital, and you're, whatever, you can sort of see the route that I'm going down. So the long and the short of it is, for a young person who's really interested in being an instructor, you just got to put in your time. You've got to go on those trips. You've got to, light a couple of hundred friction fires, spend lots of nights out. A good friend of mine, I was visiting him a little while ago, and it might be on a previous podcast of ours. Jeff Butler said, he was talking to a martial arts instructor back when he was in the Canadian Army. And the guy said to him, he said, "Listen, Jeff, everybody wants to be a black belt, but nobody wants to get punched in the face over and over again." So, if you think about becoming a reputable bushcraft or outdoor skills or survival instructor, don't think about standing in front of a group at a big rendezvous and everybody's oohing and ahhing over you. Think more about all those horrible nights when you're laying out in some crappy shelter getting eaten alive by bugs or soaking wet from the rain, or it's bitter cold out and everybody on the trip is having an attitude and all those things, because that is what's going to make you reputable and competent. Putting in the time, essentially, to use that other metaphor, getting punched in the face over and over again. That's how you get the black belt.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't know because I've never gotten any bug bites or been wet before. But I'll take your word for that one.
Pictures of you. I was looking through some old photos, and I have pictures of you where it was like you had the smallpox. I don't know if it was your arm or your leg, but it was like, is that a human under those welts? You couldn't really tell.
If you send me that picture, I'll plug it in here just so people can see. It's ridiculous. It's very bad. Very bad. I have scars from it. Scars to this day on my arms.
Do you really?
From that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do. Well, and from years and years after that. Because it never changes. Every summer they're everywhere. That's awesome. But yeah, I'd agree with you on that. As far as like long term, if right away, you're like, I want to be a bushcraft instructor. Here's a follow-up to that. Do you think that college has to play a role in someone becoming a really good bushcraft instructor? Or in what way would a college degree be beneficial in that? Because there's lots of different ways to go about becoming fully educated as like a primo bushcraft instructor. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to be on record as saying that more education is never a bad thing. But, I think that we've, in the modern world, maybe taken education and made it sort of job training. And I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find a university education that's going to be good job training for being a bushcraft instructor. That being said, the more well-read you are, the more you know about the natural history of the area, all those things, probably the better off you'll be in the long run. But as vocational training, and especially in this day and age when college prices are going through the roof, and tell me about it, I have 2 kids. They're not quite old enough yet, but it's definitely coming down the pike, and it makes me nervous. So I don't think it's necessarily a requirement, but it would never hurt you. Except maybe financially.
Yeah. Except if you're going to like out of state university and it takes you 9 years to graduate or something like that, and go into 100,000 in debt. But that's not every. Yeah, and that's.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's kind of the same way I feel about it. Like you can, if you actually know 100% that you want to teach people in the outdoors, you can just pursue it for years and years of intense study and be awesome at being, if you're actually talented at teaching and you enjoy that. But say you're someone who wants to teach bushcraft and survival, but hey, you also want to study it through the realm of like anthropology. Well, then you should probably go and find a good university and study anthropology or whatever for put in those years if you want to be specific in that realm of study. I think they call them. I think they call them majors. I wouldn't know, but and for context, Tim, you have a master's in education, right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Undergraduate, actually, in anthropology. So.
Oh, hey, there you go.
There you go.
I think I knew that, but it's it's actually like real common in the, well, I mean, not super common. It's more common to find like an accountant who is like, man, I hated my job, and then became, you know, a instructor somewhere else. But
they're not. The world isn't interested in the story of someone who knew what they wanted to do and went and did it.
yeah,
The world's interested in the story of like this former Facebook executive decided to pitch it all and go teach bushcraft, right? But
right.
if you've been teaching bushcraft for 20 years, those reporters writing those stories just don't care.
Right.
There's no hook for them. It doesn't matter to them.
Right. I'm gonna try to double sync my audio here. Let me try to. This is Sam working magic. I'm doing a magic trick on. There we go. Okay, that should work. That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to see because you don't want to send someone into like a bunch of debt. Like that's why we're kind of on polar opposites of like the educational field. So like you went super academic, but also did other very specific studies in like botany and things of that nature. Whereas I just went straight into like career, like strict career training and like personal adventure endeavors. So it's pretty interesting. But like for me, I'd probably recommend like definitely do an immersion program. Yeah, definitely do that. Definitely do something that involves you teaching somebody, whether that's teaching at like a community nature center like what I do, or the kind of the wilderness therapy programs are really good, like Anasazi out west. Lots of other Anasazi is like the big one, Wingate, all those. I see a lot of people go into there and they spend so much time teaching skills to people who don't want to learn those skills, and it makes them really talented and makes the person very well rounded. So I think the second you turn 21, if you think you're up to it, that's a good thing for people to look into, if only for during the summers. It's a good deal in my opinion. Are there any like course-wise, any other schools that you'd say this program is worth doing?
I'm off the grid for 6 to 7 months of the year, and to be honest, like I don't, my knowledge of this industry is probably 18 years old. So I'm not even sure who's in business anymore that much, unless I see them personally or keep in touch like we keep in touch. So I don't really know, to be honest with you, and I'd hate to lead people astray. I will say though, just to follow up on that for someone who really wants to, and we've got a couple articles on this or at least one article on our website that would probably be good to link to for that young person to read, that there's several ways that people have made a living doing bushcraft, and those include making and or selling gear, guiding trips or facilitating experiences, and then teaching skills. And then in a lot of, as with any sort of job, there's two main ways that you go about it. Either you look for a job working for someone else, or you create a job working for yourself. So probably the longest and hardest route is to create a job working for yourself, teaching skills. Because the skill sets that you need to pull that off, you need to know your stuff, right? You need to know exactly like what the skills are. Number two, you need to know how to teach them. So you need a background in education, and it doesn't have to be a formal background, but knowing how to teach somebody things. Number three, you need those business and marketing skills to be able to pull off running a small business. So there are lots of books out there. The one that comes to mind is the E-Myth, and I can't remember the guy's name, but basically he says if you really like being a baker, don't open a bakery, because then you're not going to bake very much. You're going to then be forced to like do accounting and write ads and do all these things. So, I think the myth is, for someone like me who's been doing this for 2 decades, is that every morning you're out, at dawn casting a dry fly to a rising trout. And that's just not realistic. There's a lot of time spent behind the scenes doing background stuff. For example, how many times a week do I take trash to the dump? We have an off-grid camp, but man, we sure end up with a lot of like cans and bottles and plastic wrappers and stuff. We compost everything that'll rot, but there's the going to the dump and scrubbing toilet buckets from the human manure system, and all the really glamorous aspects of running a school, right?
Yeah, and on the topic of being off the grid, when Tim says he hasn't really kept up on things for the last 18 years, the first thing I learned when we met for the first time, we went to a grocery store to like get a couple staples like potatoes and just stuff like that, dry goods. And he pointed to one of the tabloids and he says, "This is where I get all my news."
It's true.
So for the last year, he can't tell you like general things that have happened, like if there's an earthquake in Bora Bora or wherever. I don't know. He probably hasn't heard of it. He knows who the Kardashians are dating or married to, or how many babies they have, though. So he knows the real important details. He just
celebrity breakups.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm an amateur celebritologist.
Yeah. Yeah. It's another thing to add, about it, when you live in the woods. For my program, it was, at least like 4 or 5 weeks the first time. When I came back, it was another like 2 or 3 weeks, and Tim is really humble and stuff when it comes to bushcraft, but he's just a complete jerk when it comes to 90s pop culture. You just can't. He just thinks he knows everything about it. So it's.
Well, my popular culture references ended in 1993, right? Like that was when I left undergraduate, didn't have cable TV or anything like that, and so yeah. I see these headlines like greatest TV show ever retiring after 10 years or something, and I've never heard of it. So that's
That's
I'm the one guy. I never saw, what was it, NYPD Blue? That's probably been off the air forever. That I still think, oh, that's that new show. Or
yeah, NYPD Blue.
Never seen Game of Thrones or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I haven't seen Game of Thrones. No, I haven't.
Anyway.
Well, I have a friend who's a boss instructor, though. On the other side, at this day and age, if you really want to, I have a friend who's a boss instructor who won't miss an episode of Game of Thrones. He'll find out some way. He's probably missed a couple, if he's out teaching or something like that. But,
the technology these days, it's hard to. I like to jokingly say, in 1995, my undergraduate degree fresh in hand, I bought a $500 12-foot-long travel trailer and dragged it up to Alaska and lived in it for a year. And it was awesome. I loved it. But that was the last time I've ever really been away. Because for me, anyway, that was pre-internet. There weren't cell phones. Maybe some people had them. I didn't have them. So this was still in the era, and you might not even get this, but there was this thing called long distance, where calling somebody on the phone, if they weren't in the same town as you, cost like $3 a minute. So, I was scrapping by financially, and I'm certainly not going to make like $40 telephone calls on a regular thing. So when I left, I remember I gave my parents a hug, shook a couple of friends' hands, said, "Hey, I don't know when I'll see you, but I'll see you sometime." And, I wrote physical letters, because that was still, I don't know what a stamp was back then, 20 cents or whatever, but everything else was just super expensive. And now you can go anywhere and you're not off the grid. What was it? Some guy on the International Space Station, I saw a headline, watched the Star Wars movie. They just like uploaded it to him. And so now I see people in the field. They're on our courses on long expeditions with, sat phone hookups, and they'll download their show and watch it in their tent at night. So
no way, really?
It's so to sort of cut yourself off from that at this point, it's a personal choice, right? It's not like the technology isn't there to keep you firmly, on the hook, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Like right now, at this point, high-speed internet, in like no matter where you want to go in the world, is pretty easy. Like you get a big enough satellite dish, hook it up, and you're ready to roll. A couple glitches from time to time, but it's really not a big deal. That's something I've learned in the last year that's possible. I was like, oh my goodness. But we should probably touch a little bit on, tell us about your year. So you went to Alaska after undergrad for a year, lived out of a little tiny 12-foot trailer, right? And tell us about why'd you go there and what'd you do as part of that experience? Because there are some little nuggets in there that you did that are just really, really interesting.
So I met some people. We did a 30-day primitive camp in the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge the summer before. And then the guy who was kind of hosting, he and I hit it off. So I came home. I had a couple of family responsibilities at that point. When I got out or finished those, purchased the trailer, drove up there, and kind of he mentored me a lot with regards to wild plants. He was an awesome fisherman and definitely got my fishing skills up to snuff up there, with big Alaskan fish. It wasn't, catching smallmouth bass or largemouth bass in ponds and things. It was, big king salmon, red salmon runs. So, and just had a blast up there. I also worked with that guy washing windows, and we're still in contact to this day. Still great friend and mentor to me.
So you washed windows. Didn't you also do some botany studies up there?
Oh yeah, I took a community college class at Kenai Peninsula College with Boyd Schaefer, the flora of South Central Alaska. Awesome class, awesome guy, just epic, totally fantastic.
Nice. And then, there's so many interesting things. Were you you wrote a letter to Dick Prenneke too? The big Alone in Alaska guy. So people would be interested in this. How'd that go down?
Boyd Schaefer, who taught the class, the botany class, he knew Dick somehow, and we got to talking. And this was before he had written it was basically his book, but it came out in a magazine called Alaska Geographic, years before. And then, so I wrote him a letter. He wrote me back, and I still have the letter. I think it's right over here, but I'll look for it in a second. We did a blog post you could link to where it's the letter scanned in Dick Prenneke's handwriting. It's a few years old. But
we'll link that up. That'll be in the show notes, guys. In the show notes, if I remember, and I won't. But
you can see Dick Prenneke's handwriting. But I was just a young guy, and I just sort of asked him about his life and asked him if he had any advice to someone who was really interested in kind of living in remote places and stuff. And, he didn't know me from Adam, so he wrote back a very nice letter, and, I still have it to this day. And
That's
it's funny.
Awesome.
It's always funny, you do things when you're young, and then 20 years later, that person that you interacted with becomes this huge celebrity and everybody knows your name, and you're like, hey, look, there's the letter from so and so. So
the handwritten letter. Yeah, it's awesome.
So again, talking about technology, just wrapping that bit up, was that for me, that was the last time it was really you were away. Our field school, yes, we're off the grid. There are no wires that come in, but there's a cell tower 3 or 4 miles away. So ironically, someone can be in their primitive shelter that they built, looking at their phone on YouTube, reading about or watching videos about primitive shelters, right?
Yeah.
The irony isn't lost on me. The beauty of Maine, though, is that so many spots in northern Maine, most of it, there is no cell coverage still because it's just remote working forest. There are no towns or anything. So that's a good thing. But if people are hooked up with the satellite technology, which gets easier and easier every year, then that's not a thing. So we've actually had discussions, and amongst our staff, we will have discussions about, is this the year we want to break down and get a satellite phone or get a satellite hookup for safety?
Yeah.
And it's a conscious decision, and we've always said no, because that really changes the mentality of the people on the trip. Whereas if you have that expectation of rescue, maybe you take more chances than you need to. And I was actually quoted a couple of years ago, interviewed in, I think it was Outside magazine or Nat Geo or one of them. Anyway, they were talking about people who had gotten lost and what is the role of technology in the backcountry. And that expectation of rescue, that expectation of having that lifeline to the outside world increases the risks that people take. Anecdotal, I don't have data to back that up. So, to this day, we still say, hey, if we're going off for a couple of weeks away from where there's cell coverage, we're consciously not bringing that level of technology to let us call back. And who knows, maybe in a few years, the insurance companies will require it, and maybe we'll have a change of heart and say, hey, we're going to start carrying that technology. We've also been very fortunate in that, we're really on people, especially on remote expeditions, about safety, right? Like if someone doesn't know how to swing an axe safely, I don't want them on a trip with me, because if we are somewhere far out and someone chops their leg, like trips over right then, and it's just basically a rescue operation to try to get them to the hospital before they lose a limb. And we all have the required medical training and things, but again, it's a conscious decision to limit that amount of technology.
Yeah, definitely, and very, very important to know that, like, before you go off on most of these big trips, you spend some time at the field school where you're, when I was there, we were cutting trees basically every day, every day, using an axe, using your knife to prepare things. It's part of a lifestyle element of the training, and so when you go on those big, long trips, you're not terrified that someone's going to lose a limb, or it still could happen, but it hasn't. Right, in all these years,
knock on wood.
Hasn't happened yet.
We actually added in. We have prerequisites for our longer trips now, in that people have to have studied with us, and we have to kind of know them. Just because having people show up and on day one of like a 2-week snowshoe expedition, trying to cover how to use an axe safely, verify that everybody's using it safely, then snowshoe 5 miles and set up tents and get firewood, and it's just too much. So we now have some prerequisites for participating on those trips.
Nice. Very nice. So I think I'm asking all the questions. This is also for Tim's podcast. So we should make it a little bit about me.
Yeah, so what TV
no
show
shortage of things to, talk about. What TV show was it?
Yeah.
Oh,
I want you to tell the audience.
Oh, the last one. Okay, yeah. So the last one.
More than one?
No. I've been pretty heavily involved in the whole casting scenario. Like if you ask how many have actually been on, it's one. If you ask how many I've been a part of, it's closer to like 3 or 4. As far as like getting into the casting and then learning about things. So definitely being a part of casting in multiple shows tells you quite a bit about like the politics of the industry, which is never any fun. Like I said, I started in showbiz because it was an outlet to spend more time outside. And basically almost 4 years, just less than 4 years ago, got a phone call that said, hey, they're doing a new show where they're dropping a number of guys. They're all going to be completely alone in the wilderness. It's just going to be them, some camera gear, and they get to choose 10 items to survive with. And we're going to do it. They didn't tell me this at the time, but about 3 weeks before we flew out, they said, hey, we're going to British Columbia. And that show became what is now Alone on History. So I was on the first season, and it was surprisingly, it was exactly what they told us it was going to be. Which probably the first survival television show in history to actually be what they told people it was going to be. Going into things. So literally, I flew in a seaplane. We landed. They said, actually, this producer is in the plane behind me, and he points at a little tag, like one of those little hunting trail marker tags, and he says, "You see that? That's where we left your camera crap." And then they pull over and take off. So that's the last thing anyone said to me. Hey, your camera crap's under the tree.
I love the voice you use. And we left some cigarettes, too.
Yeah, we left you some cigarettes and a beer and some nudie magazines in there. So, but not that. But and by the way, they don't do that. They don't just bring you fun stuff every once in a while. It's very strict, like competition wise. That's like what Alone is, a competition, for money. But really, it's about an experience and a really awesome solo experience. And I remember I kind of sat on a log and waited for the TV magic to come and produce, and then nothing happened. So I said, I better get a shelter set up, and I ended up leaving 55 days later, and going back to Nebraska. I was second place on that first season there, and it's been fun to watch the show grow and progress and give so many people with a really good skill set the opportunity to go out and kind of represent what they do, whether it's herbalism or bow hunting or crafting, incredible craftsmanship, all these great things. So I'm really happy to have been a part of it. Cool. And I love it. I'm glad the experience ended up a positive one. So
nice. I remember it's a very small world of people who are I don't know how to put this, but we get calls all the time from casting directors and people who are like, "Hey, we have the show idea. What do you think of it?" And I remember when they called and talked about Alone, they're like, "We're going to take 10 people and drop them off in Alaska, and they're going to have to survive for real. Last guy standing wins." And I remember talking to the guy. I'm like, there is no way that you're going to be able to pull that show off, right? And just because thinking of the logistics involved and the permits and whatever, and so super excited that they were able to do it. Super happy for you that you had a great experience there, and good for them. I spoke to somebody from there recently, last winter. I don't remember exactly when. And just congratulated them on the success of the show and that it's still going and it still has it's got a pretty rabid fan base, which is awesome in this day and age. I think that the pendulum with survival TV had swung so far that the phone would ring every day, and every day it was a stupider idea for a show, and you're just got to the point where thanks but no thanks. So it's nice that one of the ones that is authentic is still going, anyway.
Yeah, and in my opinion, if Alone ever gets taken off the air, it'll be because one, the crew is so stinking tired of being in the field for that long with no access to the outside world. It's tough on these producers. They grab them from, if you get some guy who's just off with Real Housewives of Baltimore or whatever, and you're like, okay, your next show is Alone. What do I do? Oh, well, you sit in a tent and you wait for someone to tap out, and then you go take them out of the woods with a medic. So it's it's a big deal. And then on top of that, it's just the risk factor. There's a legitimate risk if you're in the woods, if you're someone who makes a mistake. Last I checked, unless you're an alien, you're probably going to make a few mistakes when you're in the woods. We're all human, and
or but even that's just the nature of the woods, right? Even if you don't make a mistake. I worked on first couple of seasons behind the scenes of Naked and Afraid, and during the pilot, one of the producers got bit in Central America by this snake. I think it's called a fer-de-lance snake. Anyway, he was in the hospital, almost died. They had to airlift him back to the United States. So those things can happen. And so even if we always like to sort of say that if anything bad happens, that person was stupid or whatever. But nature's full of things that'll get you, even if you're at the top of your game. That's why they call them accidents.
Yeah, exactly. And I still go by the realm of thinking where you're safer in the woods as long as you know what you're doing than you are driving a vehicle. To this day, when I go out to the woods for a really long time, come back into town, and I have to ride in a vehicle, it's terrifying because you're in this little tin can and you're going 75 on the interstate. It's terrifying to me. It's so risky. But we do it every day. We're used to it.
Weren't you in the car with Greg when you guys hit a moose coming into the field school one night? I mean, you were going 2 miles an hour when it ran into you more so, but...
Yeah,
that was you, right?
That was me. Yeah, that was me. We're driving up. That's a long, hilarious story about love and friendship and moose, and mini golf is also involved. So
I can see why though. I've hit a deer before, and I've almost hit up by the field school. If you drive at night certain times a year, you're going to have to slam on your brakes because of moose, right? It's just
they're everywhere.
Par for the course. And they're really huge animals, and I could definitely understand your take that as a man who's survived a moose crash, that to be terrified of automobiles.
Yeah, I mean, That was a hilarious crash because we're in this Pontiac Sunfire, which if you're not familiar with cars, it's basically the smallest vehicle Pontiac has ever made. It's just a little tiny vehicle loaded with and we're like sunk down on this thing because we've got like a wall tent in there and all of our gear and stuff, and we're heading up. And we left way too late because these guys are just obsessed with playing mini golf. So we were playing mini golf in Algonquin, Maine we love these guys, but it was funny. We got a little late start playing mini golf in Algonquin, Maine, and we're going up. We're like, man, we got to be real careful for moose. And then 5 minutes after one of us says that, the moose comes out, this huge cow moose, and we're going real slow. We slam on our brakes, and she kind of keeps running. And I remember she was running, and her legs just like hit repetitive, in the front of the vehicle, like as we were trying to slow down. And it'd be great if Greg sees us, because the first thing he said after we did that was, "I gotta call my mom. I gotta call my mom."
Oh, it's so good. I still have, again, I was looking through old photos the other day, and I have the photo that we took the next day of like the moose impact on the Pontiac Sunfire. It wasn't like the thing was total. It was a little dent.
It was a little dent when it came out. It's crazy.
But you still hit it. I mean, a moose made it. You can still claim, and no one can call you a liar, that, yep, I survived a moose crash.
We hit a moose. We had a moose strike, whatever they call it. There's like a code for it up there in Maine.
Yeah.
We got a L7 or something like that. Awesome, man. That's great. But you've actually had quite a few of your students like go on reality TV and consistently do really, really well.
Yeah,
right?
I think if we had to put it together, we could put together the reality TV dream team of Jack Mountain alumni. Ryan Holt, a.k.a. Yukon, crushed it on Naked and Afraid and went back on their, I think it's XL, like their sort of greatest hits version. So he crushed it a couple of times. Yeah.
So Ryan Holt is kind of well known for being the guy who killed an alligator in the Everglades, which is, by the way, that's not an official skill being taught at Jack Mountain. Last I checked, was alligator hunting, but learning a few basic concepts about bushcraft. We got a little boomstick together, killed a alligator, and then Jens Rasmussen as well did really, really well on his show.
Yeah, were they migration? Was it they hiked across Africa?
Migrations, yeah.
Yeah. Again, like I haven't seen most of these. I hear about them third hand, but. Anyway, just super excited for everybody. And, like in the case of you or Ryan or Jens, I think that it has much more to do with the fact of the person that we're drawing to Jack Mountain than anything that they learned on the course. So I would applaud you and your exploits and certainly wouldn't want to try to take any credit for any of that. But, I just think that it's awesome that you've had such success with that, and who knows what the future will bring. I think it's great.
Definitely, there's that kind of kinship in there of wanting to do some wilderness travel. Wanting to actually go out and have legitimate adventures rather than sitting around talking about the best and brightest and most extreme bushcraft knife that we can fall off cliffs with and still get out alive.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a lot more about just really enjoying ourselves in the outdoors through, proper canoeing skills, proper camping skills, learning how to cook in the wilderness, things of that nature. Actually, Tim, that was a planned segue. Tim has actually written a book that is a very good. I have it in the vicinity here, just not close enough to grab, but selling for, he's not making any money off of it, but he's selling it on Amazon for like less than $10 or something. And this book is basically a rundown on your outdoor cooking system. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's called The Woods Cook, and it's just the systems that we use to manage food, to manage cooking kits, and then a few recipes on remote expeditions or just living somewhere without any infrastructure. So it's not, nothing that we do is trying to be like a bestseller or become the flavor of the week. But, if we think that it would be useful to people, maybe before they come to a program or before they go on a long trip of their own, that's why we put it out there, that hopefully, someone would find it super useful. And we've had pretty good feedback with it. I don't know, it's been out there for 4 years or so, and I think we've sold 11 copies. My mom just bought 10 of them, and then you're number 11.
Yay! Woohoo! Lucky number 11.
Yeah, as in 2018, if you want to get rich and your name isn't Stephen King, you don't plan to do it by writing books.
No.
But there's a really good, it's really useful to put things down on paper and to commit to the writing process, because it helps to get your head wrapped around the problem, so to speak, and put it down for posterity.
Yeah, I was actually working on a vampire bushcraft novel for teens. Nice. I think that'll be real successful, but otherwise, yeah, better for doing it just for the sake of learning.
That's the name of my band, is Teen Vampire Rock Band. You heard it here.
Nice. But yeah, anyway, good book on. Got my headphones are broken, so I just shove them into my hat.
I was wondering about the hat. That's
yeah, I have
good improvisation right there.
Yeah, so it's something you learn at Jack Mountain. Is my headphones broke actually, so they banned part of them, so I just have the ears. So I just shoved them into a hat, and nice. Then they fit, and it's been flawless up until about 20 seconds ago when it fell out. Awesome. Well, great. Any I touched on everything I wanted to touch on. Do you have anything else you wanted to mention here, Tim?
So yeah, other than not really, but can you just tell them, for our listeners and viewers, because we'll put this online, how do they find you?
Yeah, so I am at woodsongwilderness.com. We're actually revamping the entire website, adding the podcast and blog and such. So I blog there, I podcast there, and so for learning about anything, appearances, so to speak, which is just whatever bushcraft gathering I decide to drink coffee at the moment, for appearances and anything like that. So woodsongwilderness.com is my personal website. What's my Facebook name? What am I on there as? On Facebook, I am... It's awesome technology loading. Okay, so Samuel Larson Woodsong is what I'm under on Facebook. And then Tim, to end, you're at jackmtn.com.
Yep, and we've got a bunch of websites, but you can access them all from there. Like this past year, we did a whole back end reformulating where we put the blog on a separate thing, and we've got a whole bunch of stuff. So, but it's all easily linked together from there.
Nice. And an excellent podcast as well, right?
Yeah, we're on social media, but don't follow us on social media. Don't bother. They just changed all their algorithms. You'll click like or follow, and you'll never hear from us. So go to the source. In 2018, it's the year to go to the source and eliminate all the Zuckerbergs of the world from being middlemen.
And it's Jack Mountain Podcast is what it's under. There aren't a lot of bushcraft podcasts, surprisingly. Well, there's a lot of like prepper podcasts or whatever, but for actually talking about bushcraft, there's not many. And so it's pretty easy to find. So Jack Mountain Podcast. So awesome. And I've got nothing else. My brain has run out of things.
I've been fresh out of ideas for 15 years.
I was recently told by a literal psychologist that she's like, has anyone ever told you like probably have ADHD? And I was like, well, you're the doctor,
I was recently told that I'm so well-rounded that I have no point. Yeah. We'll be here all week. Try the fish.
Let's end with a pro tip. So I'll give one pro tip, and then you can give a pro tip. So I'm not really
sure what a pro tip is, but I'll try to learn from the context of your pro tip.
Yeah. So my pro tip is when you're guiding a group of people, when they arrive to camp, what you should do is you should steal all of the head guide's jokes and tell them to the newcomers in the camp before the head guide comes in, so that when he tells the jokes, it's just a bunch of blank stares. It's something that I employed as a teacher's assistant under Tim. We'd get new students rolling in, and I'd tell them all of his jokes. And then he rolled in, and he was like, huh, was it the presentation?
The past is all coming together for me. It's like puzzle pieces are just fitting together now. Yeah, my pro tip is never have teaching assistants. It's just a horrible idea. Nothing good will come out of it. Hey, Sam, listen, it's been awesome talking to you. I've got to go cook some dinner for my kids here. But hey, great talking. Let's do it again before too long.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. You have a good one.
You too.
All right, so that's our interview with Tim. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it very much, and we hope that you guys will subscribe, like us on Facebook. This podcast is going to be on the iTunes. It's also going to be on an Android app soon, as well as on YouTube and Facebook. So thanks for checking it out, and we hope to see you guys for another awesome podcast next time.